Well, let's get going, everyone. Welcome. I'm Laurie Madosky Shaw, your co-chair with Phyllis Jensen, and having some technical difficulties this morning with getting my camera to cooperate on my laptop. So in the meantime, I'm trying to get my PC to cooperate, and if so, then I'll switch over. But for now, let's get going. We have also got Matt Long and Tony Johnson, who are vice co-chairs of this BRAC committee. So welcome both of you as well, and welcome everyone onto the call. We are doing today NIMBY to YIMBY Part 3 with an emphasis on neighbors for neighbors. So we are really excited to hear about this side of that part of trying to do smart growth in Central Ohio. So we'll get to that in a moment with introductions. But for now, I would like to introduce Phyllis Jensen, who's going to tell us a little bit about our Facebook group as well.
Good morning. Thank you, Laurie. There is a Facebook page that is for new builds and Columbus realtors. It's a closed group specifically to discuss new construction needs and options. You must be a member of Columbus Realtors or a builder rep to join, but all you need to do to join is just go to Facebook and ask to join, and someone will accept your invitation right away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phyllis. Appreciate that. And I think with that, Marquet, is there anything else I should share or mention before we introduce Brent, who will get us into our program today?
Nope. Well, just a couple things. Keep your microphones muted if you don't mind, so that we can hear the speakers, and we're recording this. And also questions go in the chat, and we're happy to address them throughout the program. This is more of a conversation versus just a presentation. So thanks everyone for joining.
Very good. Thanks, Marquet. Okay, with that, let's get rolling then. I'm going to introduce Brent Swander, and he is going to start our program with introducing our guest speaker today. So if you don't know Brent, I know many of you do. He currently serves as Vice President of Government Affairs for Columbus Realtors. It's a position he's held for the last 8.5 years. He's responsible for advocating Columbus Realtors' public policy agenda and managing Central Ohio Realtors Political Action Committee, CORPAC, the political arm of, which is the political arm of Columbus Realtors. And most of us know him, or most of you know him, but prior to joining Columbus Realtors, he served in the White House and a stint on campaigns, having worked at the highest levels of 3 presidential, congressional and statewide, and also several local campaigns. So we are in great hands with Brent on the side of Columbus Realtors, and we appreciate you. And with Brent, I will let you, or with that, Brent, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Laurie. Thank you all for being here today. We have really focused the BRAC committee meetings on NIMBY to YIMBY. And for those of you who are attending for your first time, it's not in my backyard to yes in my backyard. We at Columbus Realtors have long held a policy position, although not really in writing. We are not pro growth, we are pro responsible growth. There has to be reason behind what is being built. We have focused the first 2 series on really understanding the NIMBY mentalities and NIMBY attitudes. And we have also included some public and elected officials into these conversations. So today, the group thought it would be great to hear from a newer group, a citizen-initiated group here in Columbus called Neighbors for More Neighbors Columbus. So we have Mindy Justice and Michael Wilkos who have joined us. And to give you a little bit about who they are, Mindy has spent her career in marketing, public relations, and community affairs in Central Ohio region. She is currently with Murphy Epson, where her primary focuses are building community consensus for complex projects, mobilizing grassroots support for infrastructure improvements, and facilitating community meetings to enable informed decision-making. She's previously worked at the Columbus Regional Airport Authority, where she focused on air freight in the logistics community at Rickenbacker and John Glenn International. Outside of work, she advocates for a better connected Columbus as vice chair of the Transit Columbus Board of Trustees, and also a member of the Columbus Children's Choir Board of Trustees. She holds a BA in Strategic Communication from the Ohio State University and an MBA with a focus in Public Administration from Ohio Dominican. Michael, many of you probably recognize or know. He has a long history, great history here with Columbus Realtors, holds a BA in Urban Geography and a Master of City and Regional Planning, both from the Ohio State University. And he's worked in transit advocacy, community development, neighborhood revitalization, and housing related issues for over 30 years. For the past 18, he has worked as a grant maker for the Columbus Foundation and the United Way of Central Ohio, investing millions of dollars into Franklin County nonprofits, working to achieve social good. And he currently serves as the University District Commissioner, a volunteer body that advises the city of zoning, land use, and development. With that, I also just want to caveat this with, we at Columbus Realtors need to be thinking strategically about growth in the region. We've talked about the underbuilding, the lack of inventory, the NIMBYism. We may not agree with every policy position from every group out there. It is okay to agree to disagree. But Neighbors for More Neighbors Columbus, on their website, their platform is simple. We need more housing. We need more responsible housing at all levels. So it is perfectly acceptable to hear diverse opinions. I'm not saying that this group is going to give us too many diverse opinions today, but just know that things that are being said are great for discussion. We can't just build our way out of this with bricks and sticks. There have to be innovative solutions that are done. And that's why we welcome our friends Mindy and Michael to present their citizen-led initiated group, Neighbors for More Neighbors Columbus. So Mindy, Michael, I'll turn it over to you. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Brent. I really appreciate it. Let's see, if you wanted to open up the slide deck, that would be good. So yes, so thank you very much. Truly, we are happy to be here. I think it's an important note, what Brent said, that we are a citizen-led group. So a little bit about myself. Maybe I want to start with the most obvious thing. My day job absolutely informs the advocacy work that I do outside of work. So I've been active community member, gosh, really since high school, and am a Columbus native. So I've seen a lot of our evolution over the last 3 decades or more. So kind of the why I spend my time and energy doing this is I've really been in so many meetings, so many community conversations that are really drowned out by negativity. And there really is a silent majority out there. And there's also positive voices that are saying out loud, hey, Central Ohio's growth is really great. It's beyond the city of Columbus. There's a regional aspect to it and it's exciting. And that presents some wonderful opportunities. So that's really the vantage point that I'm here for. I know it sounds very hold hands and sing kumbaya, but truly there is room for positive conversation on how we will work through the change that is in front of us. And that's really what I'm here and a part of this group. So what I'm going to talk with you today, Michael and I are going to just talk a little bit about what the group is, how we were formed, and the type of advocacy we do, and sort of how you can choose to be engaged or be aware of kind of what we're doing to learn and grow, or to disagree, also acceptable. All right, so next slide. So what we're a self-funded group. As Brent mentioned, we came about, and actually it was early 2020 before a lot of other events unfolded in 2020. So the very early parts of 2020, we came together as a self-funded grassroots group of residents who really stand for more housing for everyone. It really came to pass because we saw so many conversations around simple build outs like duplexes, fourplexes, getting really mired in negative vitriol that didn't seem to warrant such anger. And we were just kind of tired of it and wanted to say something positive. So when we say we support homes of all shapes and all sizes for all kinds of people, what do we mean? It means that, frankly, we have a good stock of single family homes, but we are sorely undersupplied in a host of other formats like duplexes, fourplexes, carriage houses. There's a whole host of things that are even beyond what you think of when you think of apartment complexes, right? And a lot of the multi-use formats, we're sorely undersupplied in those, and that's really impacting our housing market. We were really inspired by some work done in Minnesota a few years back. Minneapolis embarked on a massive zoning code overhaul, and a grassroots group emerged from that. It was downright edgy, full of nerd zoning humor, and really it made the concepts that a lot of us in the planning community kind of see and know all day, every day, made it really funny and digestible and edgy, and it got attention. So if you ever have a moment and want to Google that original group, you'll find a lot of funny memes and also some really powerful and kind of edgy stuff. We are a licensed chapter of that organization, which is where the naming branding came from, Neighbors for More Neighbors. But that said, we get to be our own version, right? So there are a few other chapters in other states too. Michigan has a couple. Cleveland has been toying with starting their version of it, so I'm not sure where they are in that process right now. So we intend to learn, right, from them, and they did a fantastic job of establishing a foundation, and then we'll go from there on the best path for Central Ohio. So there are 4 founders. Michael and I are 2 of those. We have a website up, blog posts. We really, though, want to stay really nimble and grassroots. We don't foresee setting up a formal structure because we're really about mobilizing. There's a lot of good work to do, and so that's what we're going to focus on, rather than committees and structure in the sense of in that sense. So next slide. So when we talk about all homes and we talk about supply, I think it's important to note that we value finding ways to say yes, because we know it's an important element sort of in the broader success of our region. Despite significant construction, all those cranes in the skies that everybody sees, 150,000 fewer people live in urban Columbus now than they did in 1960. 150,000 fewer, even with all those cranes in the sky. We have to repopulate our urban core. It's just critical. The time is now. The need is urgent. So we also, it's funny, the NIMBY to YIMBY conversation, people ask us, are you the YIMBYs? Are you the YIMBY group? And you know, there's a lot of ways to slice and dice terminology. We're kind of okay with you calling us that. You're just not going to hear us use that term, in a large part because we're a pretty pragmatic group that keeps the vitriol to a minimum, and there's just not a lot of value for us to be going toe to toe with somebody who disagrees. So you just won't hear us use that terminology. We're really here to raise voices, and we know that that's very empowering and it can happen. So next slide. So I don't have to tell you that Central Ohio is growing, and there's a few reasons why we're growing. Families are expanding, people are living longer. Mike will talk a little bit more about this stuff, but in-migration is occurring also across Ohio, around the world. And our economic development professionals are doing a bang-up job. And so they've been successful in attracting companies and jobs and tax base. The Ohio State University continues to grow. So the question remains in front of us when we get into neighborhood, build out specific conversations. And we do get this question of like, yes, just not here. The question really is always for all of us to answer at project by project levels. Well, okay, if you don't want new neighbors near you, where specifically should the 25,000 people we add annually live? So that's where we live in, is that conversation. It's fiscally responsible, right, to have folks in a more condensed focus area, because it does let tax dollars go further. It's a simple numbers game. It provides each resident better and more access to public goods when things are more tied in than when they're sprawled out, right? There's just fewer water pipes, roadways to maintain, electric, all of the things that we need to be a thriving society. And in that light, in addition to just being a better cost structure, it's a resiliency issue. There is a real financial resiliency that matters in the health of our city and our region, especially when the chips are down. We know economic cycles are going to happen. And we talk about resiliency and planning for that inevitable. One element is a density of build out that's really critical to that element. So in fact, and this is where, we might disagree just a little bit, is for us, the method of building just single family homes, frankly, squanders precious resources that should be used to make our communities more prosperous. It's also more environmentally conscious on a number of fronts, including the waste we put out by commuting, right? These long trips versus a shorter trip, or walking, biking, and other methods, which are more realistic if you're in a shorter commute cycle. It's also, the green space, the beautiful green space that gets upended sometimes in the name of additional housing. And so we need to look at not just building something dense, but where does it make sense to build something dense? And I think that's something that is interesting. When we talk about density, we don't believe that everybody should have to live in an urban core. We do believe that we have plenty of single family homes that offer that different option. And we really believe that if we're going to get where we need to go, then we have to build out all the rest of the type of stock. So it's not an anti-single family home group. It's a, hey guys, we've got plenty. We need to go over here a little bit more. So next slide. So what do we mean by that? Many planners and housing advocates talk about the missing middle in the US right now. The missing middle is a conversation we've had for a while. I don't have to kind of rehash our home building history for you, but I do think it's helpful to level set on what we mean when we say diverse housing stock. The two most commonplace types of housing in our region really is single family homes and apartments. There are a lot more options that are very commonplace in other cities, other countries, and frankly, it's the way we used to build housing, even here, even in the area, the region. Sometimes we hear, well, that's good over there. That's not us. We certainly acknowledge we're not identical to maybe Seoul, South Korea, or Toronto, right? Like we need to be looking at the realities, but it certainly makes sense to take a look at what folks are doing that does translate here. It's about being open to conversation and talking holistically about how we're going to put the people that are coming into an environment that is worthwhile for them. And again, Mike will talk more about that stuff. So next slide. So briefly before I kind of pass off to Michael, I want to just remind folks that it's hard to believe that even with the growth of our city, 150,000 fewer people live in urban Columbus today than in 1960. And it's important to look at how we can get to a place of repopulating our urban core. Looking back at history, you don't always want to go back to everything in the past. So I understand that we're saying out loud, we believe that that was a good way. And some folks are going to say, but I don't think it was, right? Nobody's going to say, let's go back to before electricity just because it's historically accurate, right? So we understand that that is a pin in the sand that we're placing. And that is that we do believe that that is a reality that needs to be there for our community. Next slide. So I'm just going to say out loud our platform, and then Michael's going to talk a little bit more about them. So we need more housing. Our region is growing, and even with all the buildings, we haven't been building enough. And when we say enough, we don't mean just single family homes. We mean denser build outs that allow for more folks to be in a smaller space. and housing costs are through the roof. And one important element, not the entirety of it, but a good chunk of it has to do with housing, stabilizing housing prices. So we don't have enough housing supply. I know I've said it ad nauseum, but it's really at the core of everything we do. I'll let Michael talk more about our platform.
Great. Thank you. We can move on to the next slide. You know, Mark Kay has known me for a long time, and so she knows this brief story. I grew up in Youngstown, and I got fascinated with Columbus as a kid because it was the only place that was growing. And you can read the stats here on the slide. But in 1980, when I got the Ohio Almanac, I was like, why is this one place in Ohio growing? And I wanted in high school to write an article in the high school newspaper encouraging everybody to move to Columbus when they finished high school. And there was really no interest from the journalism advisor for such an article. And I took an ad out in my high school newspaper advertising Columbus, right? That was 1985. And so here I am decades later, right? I still love Columbus. It is still a growing region. And I am, because of my role as a grant maker, I get to serve on lots of things, right? I've just been asked to serve on CODA's Link Us for the East-West Transit Corridor. I've served on MORPC's regional housing strategy, which has come up with 100 recommendations for, you know, the ex-urban, suburban and urban housing strategy. I'm also on Converge Columbus, which is an effort that just launched in July, focused on increasing the home ownership rate of African Americans in Columbus. If you've not had a presentation on Converge Columbus, it is focused on Memphis and Columbus. I also serve on the Equity Now Coalition for their neighborhoods and quality of life. That is from the Columbus Urban League, which is looking at neighborhood issues. And I'm also on the Economic Mobility Coalition. Those are things I serve on those because being a grant maker. All of those things are addressing the housing affordability issue, the lack of supply, the lack of availability. And I'll give one quick example. It used to be when someone lost their housing in Columbus through eviction, it cost our community $3,500 to provide temporary shelter and get that person or family linked into new housing. Right before COVID, that had gone from $3,500 to $7,500. Why? The apartment vacancy rate is so low, rents have gone up so high, landlords that used to take vulnerable people either are not, they want first months, last months, and a security deposit. And that apartment that might have been $575 a month is now $900 a month. And the amount of federal money coming to this community, because I also serve on the Continuum of Care Board, which is all the federal money for homelessness, it has not increased in 5 years. And yet the cost to this community has jumped 100% in 48 months with regard to this. So the housing shortage has all kinds of implications. Next slide. So again, we are growing. You know this because it's been printed over and over in the Dispatch and Business First. We need 14,000 units of production to accommodate our population growth. Last year was the most construction in 15 years, and it was still 3,000 units short of what we needed last year. What's also driving things are the 3 Ls, land, lumber, and labor. They're all very high right now, which is basically resulting in a lot of, particularly the multifamily that is getting built, is coming online at a pretty narrow price point. And so it's not really helping the continuum of people who need units, because all of the stuff is coming on at a high price point, because in fact, there is very little to no government money to actually subsidize land, lumber, or labor, which would allow somebody to deliver units at a reduced rate. Next slide. So, you know, what you can see here in this slide is we always have these cycles of higher production and lower production, particularly when it comes to multifamily. Even in the peak years, we've not been building enough to accommodate the population growth. To a point that Mindy made earlier, 50% of our population growth is due to babies minus deaths, natural increase. 26% is due to the in-migration of international residents. Mainly, they are coming from already existing locations in the United States, usually on the East Coast, and they are abandoning those resettlement plans because Columbus is lower cost housing, a welcoming environment, strong social service delivery system and plentiful jobs. So Columbus has seen a massive increase in the last 20 years in its international population. The smallest part of our population growth is domestic migration, the movement of American born from one city to another. Our pull factor of American born in migration really is a 250-mile radius. It's Cleveland, Dayton, Akron, Detroit, Youngstown. And when we lose people, we're losing people to the south and west. People are moving for better weather and water and mountains. But the point of this story is we will continue to grow. And in fact, a CB Richard Ellis report that just came out a couple months ago showed that Columbus had the 6th highest increase in population growth due to COVID because people left the high, expensive housing cost cities of places like San Francisco and Denver and Seattle and New York and DC, and young people came back, and all the young people that finished their college degrees who did get jobs in those cities, those jobs did not require them to move there. So Columbus saw an increase in our already existing growth rate. Next slide. So housing costs are rising. I don't need to regurgitate this. We've done this presentation for a general audience, not you. You know why housing costs are going up. And it is just unsustainable. It's shocking to me how quickly the costs are going up, and yet Columbus is still considerably below national averages and medians. What's important to understand about our regional economy, 35% of us have college degrees, 35% of us have technical skills, plumbers, electricians, construction workers, or some other kind of technical skill. That 70% of the population is able to command a good wage. 30% of our region, and in Franklin County, by the way, that's 400,000 people live in Franklin County and are living at 200% of federal poverty, which means they're living as a single person on $24,000 a year or less. And so the increase in apartment costs and housing costs is really unsustainable for a third of the population. And the lack of construction, the lack of supply is really putting a squeeze on the part-time, part-year gig economy, the people who work in all the call centers and distribution centers, which is a lot of the employment that Columbus has attracted over the last 25 years. So the increase is really unsustainable. We have a problem and it is headed for a crisis. Next slide. So the other thing that the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission has done is they've looked at what is the kind of housing typology that we currently have and what is the kind of housing typology that we will need by 2050 based on population growth. We are growing, but we're really not adding traditional families with 2 parents and school-age children. That's not the growth of the future. And so if you look at the type of homes that we need to be adding small lot and attached homes. And so by 2050, what you see here is that right now, 44% of the housing stock are larger lot single family homes. By 2050, we'll only need 31% of the housing stock will be that. Many communities are putting up barriers, right, to small lot and attached, which is why the zoning code is such a big deal. As you probably know, the city of Columbus is comprehensively rewriting its zoning code as part of its growth strategy. The last time the city of Columbus really rewrote its zoning code was 70 years ago. Every single piece of the Columbus zoning code has been rewritten in fits and starts and bits and pieces, but they've never really redesigned it. It's important that Columbus redesign that zoning code so we have a zoning code that matches the type of housing typology. In my own neighborhood of Wineland Park in the University District, a dense urban walkable neighborhood with lots of housing typology, there are a number of people, a handful, that have demolished their detached garages and rebuilt those garages with accessory dwelling units. A neighbor that did that a few blocks away needed 9 variances to get that done. The Civic Association unanimously supported it. The University Commission supported it. City staff was fully supportive of it, but it was a cumbersome process with 9 variances. That's not helpful to encourage development. Next slide. And more data here from Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. You can read the chart here. I won't go through it. It's the capital infrastructure. I'll give a couple examples. If Columbus, over the next 30 years as a metropolitan region, develops in the same way that we have grown in the previous 30 years, we will lose 700 square miles of current farmland to development. And we do have some of the most agriculturally productive land in the world. When you look at the global issue around food production and climate change, we really need to protect the farmlands that we have in Central Ohio. Another really interesting example, in 25 years, the Cleveland metropolitan area lost 3% of its population, but it actually expanded over 30% in land area of developed land. Why do taxes go up? And it seems that services do not increase. In the example of Cleveland, you have 3% less taxpayers paying for 30% more infrastructure. You've got to police it, you've got to fire, you've got to build it, you've got to fix potholes, you've got to plow the snow. That's what you're getting, right? You're getting lower quality services for higher cost. That is not a sustainable way to build an environment or to grow a metropolitan region. Next slide. And we've talked about this before. Columbus is really fascinating because of that annexation, right? I work a lot around gentrification and redlining presentations, because if you look at the 1930s redlining map and you look at all of the 93 nonprofits United Way funds as an example, all of the social ills are focused on those areas that were redlined. However, there are 16 school districts in Franklin County, and the city of Columbus is in 11 of them because of that annexation. We've created a city with 11 school districts in 3 counties in 220 square miles. And the city of Columbus is in many ways, and as you all know, right, the only 2 suburbs that touch are really Upper Arlington and Grandview Heights. And for the last 60 years, Columbus has had really an unwritten policy that we have not allowed 2 suburbs to touch. Columbus has wedged itself between Dublin and Hilliard. We've wedged ourselves between Gahanna and New Albany, right? And Columbus is in many ways a prosperous city because the city of Columbus land use and zoning code, which allows for multifamily and apartments, we have in many ways economically and racially integrated 10 of our suburbs. And so if you look at the mobility of the African-American population, Westerville, Gahanna, Reynoldsburg, Pickerington, a lot of that is in portions of the city of Columbus served by those suburban community school districts. It's allowed Columbus to actually have an unwritten equity agenda because that annexation has enabled us to grow with more equity. So as an example, the one example I like to always point out is the CMHA project on Gender Road in Canal Winchester that was very controversial, right? But it did provide access to high growth corridors for vulnerable people. What's happened though, is at the expense of this annexation where Polaris and Easton and Tuttle fall within the city's tax base, which by the way, allows Columbus to have a AAA bond rating, which enables us to be a financially secure city. And there are only, I think it's Denver, Austin, Charlotte, and Columbus are few examples of cities that are actually growing faster than its suburbs. So we are a healthy city, which gives us the resources to invest in older neighborhoods. But now Columbus has had to take this plan of what can we be doing? Because we not just need to save the Near East Side and Wineland Park and the Hilltop, but now we're seeing decline on Hamilton Road and Bryce Road and some of these other places. And so the outward expansion has costs that we need to reevaluate. Next slide. So here's an example. People are shocked when they see this data, that if you look at everything from the short north, Milo, Grogan, portions of the Near East Side, German Village, Marion Village, Franklinton, Schumacher Place, what once had 114,000 people has dropped to 46,000. When you look at the controversy that was surrounding the Pizzuti apartment project on Whittier, a lot of people were bemoaning the closing of the grocery store. The Pizzuti residential project had nothing to do with the closure of that grocery store. Giant Eagle had decided to close that grocery store. Why would a grocery store close? It closes because it has not enough business, right? It's not making money. And part of that is people are shocked to see that even German Village has half the number of people it once did. Well, if you used to have a family of 5 living in those cottages, and now you have a single person, or if you have 2 and 3 houses being purchased and then joined, you're going to have less people. Some of this is just natural in every American city, right? We have less people living in existing housing stock. But we lost a lot of housing when we built highways and we did urban renewal. And yet we have these neighborhoods that have lost half of their population. And unfortunately, they're fighting density. In the university district, people are fighting density on High Street. They're fighting density in German Village. They're fighting density in the Near East Side. That is not helpful for urban vitality, for transit ridership, and for our opportunity to have a healthy retail environment. Next slide. Another example, Franklinton has had probably the most dramatic outmigration of people. And by the way, I'm going to oversimplify a lot of demographic trends. I do have degrees in geography and urban planning again, but the white middle class picked up and moved out. The black middle class picked up and moved out about a decade later. And what that has resulted in is really underpopulated neighborhoods. And who moves out first are the people who have the financial resources to do so. What happens when the middle class white and then middle class black families pick up and move out and they leave neighborhoods of concentrated poverty becomes a real issue. So in Franklinton, only half the population has a college degree. And what we know at United Way is that a child by age 5 growing up in poverty is already 1.5 years behind academically than a middle class counterpart. And children who are growing up in Columbus's poor neighborhoods may never make up that academic disparity. And so poverty concentration is a bad thing. Next slide. Again, urban core is losing people. The government is not in the business of building housing. And so if you look at a period of 6 years, that was the last 3 years of the Obama administration and the first 3 years of the Trump administration, this community saw an increase of 333 units of Section 8 housing during a period where we added 147, and actually that should say 147,000 people, not low-income people. I've already talked about our economy. I'll say this: if you go to the map-free stadium at Hudson and 71, and you jump on 71 and you do 71 to 670 to 315 and get off at Lenox. For those of you that maybe have not been here very long, Lenox Shopping Center used to be Lenox Air Conditioning, right? In 1993, Lenox Air Conditioning closed with 1,000 jobs. 2 years later, it opened with a Target and an AMC. If you back that U from Lenox back to MapFree, when I was an OSU student in the late 80s and early 90s, there were 9 major manufacturing plants from Timken, Columbus Coated Fabrics, AC Humco, 3M Ald, Columbus Auto Parts, that provided living wage employment for people with high school educations in Linden, Milo Grogan, and Wineland Park. They have all been redeveloped. Only one went from manufacturing to manufacturing. Timken became Rogue. Jobs at Rogue pay less. Everything else has become luxury housing or retail. So there's 2 parts of Columbus. There are the people who are actually trending downward and economically struggling, with those with college degrees are rising up. And the government is not in the business of providing housing. Next. So I'll turn back to you, Mindy.
Thank you. So big data dump. And I think the big takeaway for us is we like to step back and see things high level. And so we just see this, okay, things have shifted, things have changed over time. Here are the accompanying impacts. Okay, so now where do we go from here? And what we as a group of professionals in this space are here to do is think forward about what the future can look like and how do we actually get there. Next slide. So how do we plan to do it? So on a day-to-day basis, what we do, again, we're all volunteer, self-funded groups. So day-to-day basis is a loose word. But really what we work to do is embolden pro-housing advocates, provide information, provide turnkey data and facts for people who are like, wait, this seems off to me. I think I remember hearing once that density is fine and okay. And so we just aim to give them people who, that what we think of as kind of the silent majority, frankly, a voice, data, information to arm them when they're having conversations with their friends and relatives. Secondly, it's to provide an organized voice. It's to enter into the conversation in a thoughtful manner. For example, I did provide testimony at the Pizzuti project hearing that Michael noted, just to Columbus City Council, but we also do things in other locations. So we've had other like letters that we'll send in. One of the important elements is that we have in our group homeowners and apartment renters. So we sometimes get called out in a way, we get told, hey, you don't live in this neighborhood, you don't get to make this decision. This doesn't impact you. You shouldn't be speaking. And it's an interesting phenomenon that people believe that they are so micro, there isn't a macro impact. And we know there is. I rent downtown. I rent in a nice place. It's important to understand that when somebody builds something in German Village that stymies supply, it very much impacts the market rate and it impacts my rent downtown. Not tomorrow. They aren't going to immediately raise my rent tomorrow, but it is something that we understand has a macro impact, and we look to provide sort of an organized voice and a source to say, look, here's the implications of neighborhood by neighborhood decisions at a macro level. Lastly, and Michael mentioned this, and this is probably our bigger, more long range, we have those short range, immediate conversations, but it's really our intention to engage with the city of Columbus as it moves through its analysis, planning, and drafting of zoning code updates. It's a multi-year endeavor. Some regional communities have done that already. So we know that there's some really good lessons learned from those smaller suburban communities who've done the same thing. So we're here to do that. We'll certainly, complete surveys, amplify their messages, attend community meetings to say, hey, look, you can't do it half-ass, right? We need to do this. We need to do it right. When somebody needs 9 variances to do a small thing, we need to cut all of that out. I mean, if we want to let developers come in and do some really cool things, we have to make this not a 2-year process. That is one of the biggest problems in gaining traction is we have to ask neighbors for traditional variances. It's really ridiculous the number of things we have to give neighbors the say in. And that's another element that's I think really important for us is we, as part of that vitriol and the negative conversations, something that is difficult and that we attempt to work through is people need to understand the guardrails with which they are allowed to inform. You can say, look, we need to be historically sensitive. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean we need to take your electricity out? Which time in history are we being sensitive to? It's a really complex conversation. And frankly, it's a little frustrating when we're sitting in conversations where folks are saying things that are outright racist. And even when they're not, there's a lot of that under the surface. And so that's a lot of these conversations. You don't get to say what wreath your neighbor hangs on its door. You know what? Your neighbor gets to hang whatever it wants. So similarly, if a private, for example, Giant Eagle left and Pizzuti steps in and says, look, this makes sense. We need units here. It is very okay for them to do what's within those guardrails. And as long as they do, you don't get to say whether you prefer a facade or not. And I think that's just an important element of this. It's corralling the conversation. You can't shop everything. And so you'll hear us keep our vitriol a little bit to the minimum, but boy, is it frustrating for us. Anyways, so we are here to raise voices. We're here to put out facts. We're here to be a source of conversation. And if you want to talk with us more, we love the idea of that exchange and that engagement. Next slide. And that's how you can get a hold of us. We can certainly answer questions and have conversation here, but that's kind of our initial dump of info on you guys.
Thank you, Mindy and Michael. I'll turn it back over to Laurie and Phyllis here in a second. Mindy, you said something that brought a thought to me here quickly, and we're talking about single family housing. And that we potentially might disagree on that. So as Laurie actually, part of our introduction was talking about how I manage our CORPAC, our Central Ohio Central Ohio Realtors Political Action Committee, our political arm. We were actually having this conversation 3 or 4 years ago with a candidate running for a suburban Columbus, not Columbus. I want to be very specific. A suburban council seat. And this gentleman sat in our boardroom during our CORPAC candidate interviews and literally pounded his fist on the table and said, as long as I sit on council, and this was a suburban area, not Columbus again, I will never vote for another apartment complex to be built. And this really led into this, I've never seen it before, quite interesting, I'll call it an educational opportunity and somewhat of a heated debate amongst our members and this candidate who did not win. And as I was walking him out, he said, well, I don't understand. You guys are realtors. You only care about selling houses. I said, that couldn't be further from the truth. We care about safe, affordable housing, secure housing for all. So while we talk about single family houses, you know, our members, and I'm not saying you, Mindy, I'm just in generally saying, obviously, like we care more about safe, secure housing and affordable housing for all. And I think that's oftentimes a misrepresentation of who we are as in our membership. And we're so much larger and bigger than that.
I think it's a really great point because it's everybody thinks they're an expert in everything, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit of folks saying, look, if the developer is building that, why are they building it? They're probably not doing it speculatively. For the most part, housing is being built because they're going to fill it and they want to make money. And guess what? That means there's a market for it. And we need to be looking at now, not every private sector decision is perfect. So I want to acknowledge that we say yes to a lot of things, but maybe occasionally we should say no. But let's put aside the 1% of time that's real and talk about the lion's share of the time, which is that means that there's people to fill those places. They have real market data, which says that they're going to fill that supply is necessary. So when a neighbor says, I don't think we need another apartment complex, well, I hear what you think. I appreciate the thought. I'm pretty sure their data says different. And so and secondly, when you talk about education, trends are trends, but there's been a big sort of upheaval, if you will, a big shift. And millennials and Gen Z both really want to be within walking distance to stuff. And it's not just the trend that's going to be here in just for the next couple of days, right? A lot of it is tied to the fact that we all work 24/7. This is not just a millennial condition. We are going to be working from sun up to sundown. And if that's the case, then I need to be able to go downstairs to the gym, walk across the street to the coffee shop, because I don't have time to spend an hour in traffic. So a lot of that lends itself to something that is this bigger shift in our culture that's probably going to stick around for a while. And so we just have to acknowledge, and to your point about education, I think it's people taking a step back and acknowledging change is hard. And this isn't a blip trend. This is a more of a broader shift. Michael, did you have anything else to add to that or a note?
You know, I'll just say that I often hear a lot of people say, all this stuff's being built, who's moving into all this stuff? And there's just no, you know, most people aren't looking at the data to see, to your earlier point, we're growing by 28,000 people a year. Like, we need housing. And I think the part of that, by the way, is that so many people in Columbus who make those comments have moved here from Lima and Mansfield and Dayton and Youngstown, and they're just not used to living in a city that's growing. So.
Very true. Are there any questions from the group? Any comments? That was incredible information, the statistics, the data. I at one point had heard that Columbus gets about 50 new residents a day. It sounds like that might be larger at this point. So there is a real sense of urgency for us to continue on this path of smart growth. What questions from our group exist or comments? Okay, well, Mindy and Michael, that was some fantastic information. It was a nice walk down memory lane also. Michael, I was at Ohio State the same time you were. So hearing all that you said.
I saw
resonated.
something from Deb, I think it was, in
Yeah,
the
Laurie,
chat.
there is a question. Yep.
It was about transit. So Michael and I also are major transit advocates. And the really good news about that is there's an initiative called Link Us Columbus. It's moving forward in a nice, at a nice clip. It still takes time. Unfortunately, these big endeavors do, but it's a little chicken or egg where sometimes a developer will say, put the transit line there and then I'll build there. Sometimes the city will say, well, I can't just put all that money. The federal government won't give me any funding. I can't completely self-fund this dang on thing. So I need developers to kind of be there so I know the bodies are there to get the funding. So it's a little chicken and egg. We are working on it and it's actually really happening. And I joke, I've been advocating for transit for 15 years and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's finally going to happen in my lifetime. So linkuscolumbus.com. There are at least a few corridors that are under development right now, which means they're moving into like preliminary engineering stages. So we've moved from planning and studies and analysis, and we're in engineering now. So those will start to get into the hopper. And I think you'll see, again, it's about focused growth. You don't put it everywhere. You put it in thoughtful places where it makes sense and folks are near things. So do take a look at that. I'm really happy that that's finally panning out.
And then, Mindy, to piggyback on that, somebody had commented about what about rapid transit to different cities like in Europe?
Yeah, and there is some of that. So we need to, it's interesting because it's kind of you got to think near term and long term, right? Near term, midterm, and long term. You look at a technology like Hyperloop, for example, that hasn't really been fully tested and tried out, but it's a really cool thing and let's keep going that direction. But let's not abandon all the nearer term solutions. So a lot of really cool technologies are coming to pass. Maybe they happen, maybe they don't. So we are at Amtrak, there's been a new effort at the federal level to invest in Amtrak. And so we're going to see more happen. It's on the horizon, but all the things aren't going to happen, right? Some of these will work and some of them won't. And it's a good thing to connect us to other cities, but we also have to be thinking a little bit more regionally and insular. And how are we going to protect our region and just look at rapid transit within our region?
Thank you. And then another comment here says smart growth needs to include focus on the infrastructure that does not support the additions. I'm not sure if there's anything more that we want to say there on that. If you've got thoughts or comments, Mindy or Michael, on that comment.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Is that about supporting the additional population growth? I mean, like I would argue that, so to the point of Cleveland Avenue and Linden got hurt by Northern Lights and Northern Lights got hurt by Northland and Northland got hurt by 161 and 161 got decimated by Polaris, okay? Same thing happened on Livingston Avenue on the Near East Side, got killed by Hamilton Road in Eastland, which got, moved by Bryce Road, which is now all out in 256. What's important real quick about that is Franklin County needs sales tax. And by the way, in 1997, the #1 sales tax zip code in the state of Ohio was Northland. Number 6 was downtown Columbus, and number 10 was Westland. And as that stuff that I just described jumps out, all the sales tax, well, the income tax at Polaris Mall and JP Morgan Chase on Polaris Parkway goes to the city of Columbus. That sales tax revenue is going to Delaware County, and it's not helping the city, Franklin County, to support the infrastructure that it needs because unfortunately, the social responsibility to handle the growth of low-income residents is really fallen on the doorstep of Franklin County. And let me explain it this way. As the region grows by another 1 million people, there will be 300,000 of those will be people who live, who struggle because they're at economic vulnerability. 150,000 of those people will be in poverty. Another 150,000 will be between the 100 and 200% of federal poverty. Take out the map of Metro Columbus and tell me where you're going to put 300,000 people who economically struggle. They're going to end up in Franklin County because of land use and zoning. And now the revenue, right, is jumping out onto Polaris Parkway and it's jumping out to 256. It's escaping Columbus and Franklin County's tax base. And why is it doing that? Because the infrastructure keeps getting laid into these farming communities, and it's being laid in a automobile oriented way that is low density. So in my opinion, if I could make anything different, I would be laying infrastructure that provides equity to the transit rider, the bicyclist, the pedestrian, and the car, which would enable us to be building at higher density. We are continuing to lay infrastructure as if the only way of the future is going to be cars, and I just think that's wrong.
And to piggyback on that, on those comments, one of our viewers says, "How do we support the current houseless population or homeless population? There are more and more people living on the actual street or living in cars and parking lots. You know of any coming plans to create housing for these folks?"
Michael?
Yeah, that entirely, that's my earlier point, that the funding from the federal government to support homelessness has not budged in 5 years. Community Shelter Board, which is our community system to provide shelter for the homeless, that has not increased for 5 years. And so that burden of responsibility is entirely falling on the corporate sector and the citizens of Columbus to raise those funds. The other thing that you are seeing, and we see this all up and down in the short north, downtown, and in the University District, the SID Public Services, which is the board of property owners downtown, is now wanting to install permanent public restrooms downtown because of the amount of people that are sleeping unsheltered outside, and they need to go to the bathroom, and they're going to the bathroom on hard surfaces in our downtown, and that is a public health issue. It's happening in the short north. And so we need to raise significant resources, and we're looking to use the American Recovery Funds to build these permanent restrooms. They have them in Cincinnati, they have them in Portland. We're looking at building the exact same thing. They would be power washed multiple times a day. And the reason why more and more people are in parks and other places, believe it or not, the police have just not been enforcing that kind of open camping over the last year and a half, just like you see all the reports about the ATVs and dirt bikes and motorcycles that have been running through the city. A lot of these quality of life issues, and this is now just me personal working in the issues, right? The police have just been uncomfortable in managing some of those issues for some of the pushback that they might get. And the reality is gun violence and the homicide rate and other things are really taking the vast majority of their time. In my neighborhood, I first had an apartment 33 years ago on 9th Avenue. I've been living in Wineland Park at the same place for 13 years. In those 13 years, I have never seen people sleeping in Indianola Park and Wineland Park. You know, they literally are pitching tents and sleeping in the shelter house south of the school. And the police department they used to go into those parks and they would make people move on, or they would force people to go to the shelters. The other thing that happened during COVID is there are a lot of those people that just were not comfortable going to shelters. Shelters are not set up for safe spacing and safe distance. People are in bunk beds and they are on top of each other. And so they quit going. The other thing that happened over the last 18 months, there are a lot of people in Columbus that never hit the shelter system because they were couch surfing and they were living doubled up with friends or other people that they knew. And during COVID, a lot of those people said, "I don't know what you're doing, you got to go." And so it pushed more people out into the open. We as a community raised money, and we also used some of our stimulus monies, and I'm not going to tell you where they are, but we rented entire hotels, right? A lot of these Class C hotels the Knights Inn, if you will, or a really old Red Roof Inn that really lost its business during COVID. We as a community rented those entire hotels, and we're moving homeless people into those hotels for safe spacing. We've had hotels we've been operating where homeless people tested positive for COVID, and we need to put them in a separate room. The downtown YMCA closed as a health club because the entire lower level of the YMCA became a homeless center. It's not unique to Columbus. We as a country and a society are just not funding the issue. It is government's responsibility, not the nonprofit sector, to do that.
And I think in the chat, there was another question around this. And one of the things that, so we work really hard to talk in the terms of what we do, but they're all these things are interconnected, right? And so one of the things that you'll see us do is talk about the fact that supply matters, and every small decision has these bigger ramifications. So when we talk about, well, gosh, do we just have to go back to the coffer? Just, gosh, more subsidization, more taxes, more money, more spend. One of the things we can do to make a lot of these things not cost quite as much and to make the existing government dollars stretch further is to build denser so that cities can and counties can start to have budgets that are a little bit bigger to accommodate some of these needs. And I think that's part of our thing is it's not all bad. We have a real opportunity. We just have to agree that the homelessness population or the homelessness issue is actually tied to somebody in the Pizzuti, somebody saying no to one extra layer of units at the Pizzuti project. We have to see that while it's not one for one, there's like 5 steps in the middle, but they domino real quickly. And we need to see that and own that and just really double down on density so that we can get to some place where we can begin to afford to handle some of these other things that are truly important for our quality of life.
There's a couple other comments in the chat that I want to bring up. And Sharon, thank you for your comment about retail and grocery stores. Let's talk about Northland for just a quick second. The Giant Eagle closed at 161 and 71. Kroger closed at Northern Lights. And there was a lot of people who bemoaned the fact that when Kroger closed at Northern Lights, that the Linden community no longer had a grocery store. About a year later, Saraga reopened that 45,000 square foot store. If you have not been in that Kroger, it really still looks like a Kroger, but there's lots of items that are really served to new American populations. Real quick, in Northland, over a 16-year period, because we tracked every single census tract in Northland, 16,387 white people moved out of Northland, 16,450 Black folk moved in, 3,911 Hispanics moved in, and 12,000 new Americans moved in. For 60 years, as neighborhoods in Columbus were becoming low income, they were also having less people, right? Why are there so many retail vacancies on West Broad Street in the Hilltop or Parsons Avenue on the South Side or Cleveland Avenue? The neighborhoods had less and less people, and the people who remain have less income. In Northland, we've tracked the core of Northland, which went from 40% of its residents being economically vulnerable. 20 years later, that had gone from 40% to 70%. But something very different has happened in Northland versus Linden, Hilltop, and the South Side, which got poorer and less people. Northland is growing, and it's growing and not adding any housing units. Why? Because someone like me might have lived in a 2-bedroom apartment as a single person. And the second bedroom might have been an office or a den. I pick up and move out, and a family of 5 from Bhutan replaces me. There are more people living in Northland now than ever, but they have never been more economically vulnerable. Why is Giant Eagle and Kroger closing grocery stores in neighborhoods that have more people? In my opinion, it's because they've not been able to change their business model to appeal to the changing demographics. So Kroger picks up and leaves, but it provided a business opportunity for Saraga to take that space. If you look at the Morse Road corridor from Interstate 71 to Cleveland Avenue, the retail vacancy on Morse Road is 1%. Tell me about another neighborhood that is getting rapidly poorer but has a really robust retail environment. Look at Hamilton Road from Interstate 70 down to Refugee Road. There's several million square feet of commercial space sitting empty. Why is Hamilton Road at Eastland look very different than Morse Road at Northland? Because the Far East side of the city has not reinvented itself with the new American population. I would like to suggest to you that Morse Road is more local and more entrepreneurial than High Street in the short north. It did it in half the time, and nobody planned to reinvent Morse Road as all the chain stores like TJ Maxx and JCPenney, Sears, and Lazarus picked up and moved to Polaris, or they picked up and moved to Easton, right? Because they followed the movement of the white and black upper middle class households, and those chain stores don't know how to sell to new Americans. And the new American, that dollar is turning over far more frequently in those neighborhoods. So Morse Road is very vibrant, but we live in an environment of 2021 where the vast majority of retail services in neighborhoods is driven by chain stores. They don't know how to operate in poor neighborhoods unless it's Dollar General, right? Or these other stores that function like that, or they're these new American businesses. So it's really complicated. And the global diaspora, right, is playing out on the streets of Northland every day. And why Northland versus Eastland? Well, Northland is a perfect location because it's in the middle of Polaris, the airport, Easton, and downtown. All of the major employment centers are surrounding Northland. It is a perfect location for moderate income people to go. And what I would suggest to you, as our region grows, and that means we have more low-income people, the neighborhoods which take the brunt of this are the neighborhoods not new enough to be competitive in the housing market. The Northlands and Eastlands and Westlands, the housing stock is aging. It's architecturally not very interesting. It now needs massive capital improvements, and it's not old enough to be interesting to be saved. So that's where you're really starting to see, I think, the weakness in those neighborhoods, and they will continue to be weak. And if I'm being very direct about it, if we're not in the business as a nation and a society of building affordable housing, and if we're going to have 300,000 more people who economically struggle, the only way for our region to accommodate those low-income people, we need to let sections of our city fail. And I believe the sections that are going to fail are Northland, Eastland, and Westland.
Wow. Great information. Thank you, Michael and Mindy, both of you. Very eye-opening, fantastic statistics and data. Appreciate all of that this morning. Brent, thank you also. I just want to take a moment here and remind everyone that next month's meeting will be in person. September 8th, it's going to be the Parade of Homes, and it will be at Columbus Realtors. And then after that, October 6th is going to be our sustainability bus tour. October 6th from 2 to 7 p.m. So that will also be another good program and agenda to look forward to. And then also mark your calendar for some fun at the end of the year. December 8th at 11:30 will be our holiday lunch. So stay tuned for those details later as well. So I think with that, Mark Hay, thank you also today. Am I missing anything more that we need to spread the word on before we officially conclude?
No, I think this has been an excellent presentation. Thank you, everybody, for your comments, and Michael for your link. You've given us
that
a
link,
lot.
Mark A, just so everybody knows, the link I just sent is an interactive tool that tracks every single census tract in the United States between 2000 and 2016, where you can see what neighborhoods have experienced gentrification and what neighborhoods in Columbus are experiencing low-income concentration. I want you to just know right out of the bat, only 4% of Franklin County neighborhoods have experienced gentrification. 43% of Franklin County neighborhoods have experienced low-income concentration. There are 10 times more neighborhoods that are getting poorer than getting wealthier, as the percentage of people in Franklin County who economically struggle is on the rise. And so every neighborhood is seeing their housing costs go up. The number one driver is displacement, not gentrification. Please, when people start talking about gentrification, just bonk them on the head. It is not an issue. It's not happening, right? You cannot have gentrification when your city and county is getting poorer, but you can have your housing costs going up faster than your incomes. And that's what's happening in Northland. The neighborhood is getting poorer and its housing costs are jumping because more and more low and moderate income housing consumers are competing against each other for a finite supply. The only neighborhoods where we have recorded gentrification are white neighborhoods along the High Street corridor, north and south of downtown. Now, as those neighborhoods have filled up, it is spilling over into the Near East Side and Franklinton very quickly, very recently. And if I were to say, watch out, because it's probably already too late for Franklinton and the Near East Side. That growth needs to go somewhere, and it's now no longer going up and down High Street. It's going to go east and west on Broad. That's my close.
And that is where the transit investments, by the way, are coming as well as east and west on Broad. So that has a lot of play in that.
What a wealth of knowledge the two of you had for us this morning. We are all thankful and appreciate all of this information, and it's going to have our wheels turning for a long time, I'm sure. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time today and all of your information and input. And I think with that, we will close our program today, and we look forward to seeing everyone next month in person for on September 8th at Columbus Realtors for the update on the Parade of Homes, the new Parade of Homes this year.
With John Melkai.
With John Melkai, correct, from the BIA. Thank you, Marquet. All right, everybody, have a good day.